Hi there. My name is Mary DeLear, and I'm the president of the Lupus Society of Illinois. And today we are going to be talking with Dr. Robert Katz about treatments. And Reverend Dr. Shirley Brummell is a patient, and she will be sharing her story. But first, I wanted to let you all know the Lupus Society of Illinois, the LSI, was formed in 1973, and we're the Midwest's leading nonprofit health organization dedicated to finding the causes and cure for lupus. LSI's mission is to promote lupus awareness and complement the work of healthcare professionals by providing personalized resources for the lupus community while supporting research. This is part of a series of programs we'll be working on with CAN TV. Our goal is to educate the community about lupus and the programs and services of the LSI. This event is for educational and informational purposes only. The Lupus Society of Illinois does not provide medical advice or recommendations. All of the LSI's educational efforts are for educational and informational purposes only and serve to benefit our mission. Lupus is a chronic autoimmune disease that can affect virtually any system in the body. Autoimmune means that the body attacks itself. There are active and inactive periods of the disease. Active periods are called flares. 90% of people living with lupus are women, and African American women are 2 to 3 times more likely to acquire the disease. There's no single test for lupus, and few treatments exist. Dr. Robert Katz is a professor of medicine at Rush Medical College and Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. He's a leading expert in the field of rheumatology with experience in both research and patient care. Among his many honors and awards, Dr. Katz was named in U.S. News & World Report's top doctor rankings, and this year he was among 35 physicians named top doctors by Rush. Dr. Katz has been a longtime supporter of the Lupus Society of Illinois and is currently the chair of our medical advisory board. He is the director of the Rush Lupus. He is with Rush, and he is a longtime supporter of our work with the Lupus Society of Illinois. So welcome, Dr. Katz.
Is that me?
That's you. All that's about you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Important cause.
It is an important cause, and I really appreciate your willingness to always go the extra mile and work with us on that.
I've been working with lupus for decades. So.
You have. So the LSI has been around since 1973, and you've been working with the LSI since...
Yeah, well, I'm trying to remember the year, but when I moved to Chicago, and I was always interested in lupus, so I joined the organization, and I've been with it ever since, so it's been a long time.
Yes, and I know many, many lupus patients are constituents of ours and speak very highly of you.
Thank you.
So we were thrilled to have you here.
Which ones?
I can't give you the names, but I think you'd know them.
Thank you. It's good to hear.
Yes. So my first question is, when you receive a new patient, when you're referred a new patient, they already have a lupus diagnosis?
No, they sometimes think they have a lupus diagnosis,
Okay.
or they've been Googling it. There's Dr. Google is so popular these days. Or they got a test called the antinuclear antibody test that was positive, and they're wondering with their symptoms if they have lupus. And some come with a bona fide diagnosis and lots of information supporting that diagnosis. It depends.
Okay. So when you do have someone who actually has lupus and you either diagnose them or they've been referred to you with a lupus diagnosis, how do you go about the treatment process?
So, as you know, and you referred to before, lupus has very many manifestations throughout the body. Most of them different. I mean, you have a rash or a joint pain, and that's different than if you have serious internal involvement like the kidneys. So the immune system is set up to what? Protect us, right? I mean, your immune system is protecting you right now, mine, against all kinds of germs. But what if that immune system either thinks it detects a problem in internal organs or whatever and turns against you? Turns against you. Auto means self, so it's autoimmune. It's turned against you. So we got to get it to quiet down. You want it to quiet down, to a lesser extent if the disease isn't flaring or it's not too serious. And sometimes it's just maintenance therapy, and sometimes it's aggressive therapy.
So one of the most common drugs that's used is prednisone.
Prednisone's my friend.
Yes. But a lot of patients don't like it.
A lot of patients hate it.
Yes.
But the point is it works very quickly. It's a time-honored treatment for inflammation. If you have an inflamed knee and you take prednisone, which wouldn't be the first choice for an inflamed knee, it quiets it down to a certain extent depending on the dosage. So prednisone is a steroid. Steroids are made by the adrenal gland inside our bodies. But a synthetic form of of cortisone from the adrenal gland was made, and they call it prednisone. There are various variations of it. And depending on the dosage, it calms down inflammation in the body. So it's very quickly effective when a patient needs it. A lot of patients with lupus don't necessarily need prednisone at any particular time. But if they flared, if there's major organ trouble, they probably need anti-inflammatory treatment with prednisone.
So it's not uncommon for someone to be at a higher dose of prednisone when you first see them, for instance, if they're in a flare because they would be being diagnosed, they'd have more active symptoms, right?
Right.
And then the prednisone could go down later.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose is not to keep people on prednisone, and certainly not to keep people on a lot of prednisone, but to monitor their disease and try to reduce the prednisone gradually and keep it the disease under control, either by resorting to other medicines with the prednisone or just the disease, the flare is quieted down gradually on its own.
Okay. So another very common one is Plaquenil.
Plaquenil is common too. So Plaquenil was used for malaria. I have no idea how it got stuck with lupus. It doesn't make any sense, right? We got malaria, you got lupus, they don't see eye to eye. But they used it because there was a dearth of new treatments back in the old days, and they found that this actually had a positive effect on autoimmune conditions, mostly lupus. Very good for lupus rashes and for just general features of lupus, some achiness. So Plaquenil or hydroxychloroquine, see if you have a brand name, that's called Plaquenil. And then if you look it up, the hydroxychloroquine, the generic name, though that can be quite helpful, not as strong as prednisone.
Right, right. And also, isn't there an element to Plaquenil about managing infections? Is there an element to that?
Well, maybe a little bit, but mostly it's, you don't see malaria anymore, at least in these parts.
Right.
Have you seen malaria in a while?
I have not seen malaria in a while.
I don't think there's any. So, but it's useful for mild autoimmune conditions, especially lupus.
Okay. And then the new treatments. So there really aren't a lot of treatment options for lupus patients. And there's very few. There's been one FDA drug in 50 or 60 years, and that's Benlysta.
Right. So in rheumatoid arthritis, you probably never saw the movie Awakening. They had all these sick people, and they gave them this magic drug, and they all awakened. They all got better almost overnight. Well, we had that in rheumatoid arthritis. It started with a drug called Enbrel, which was approved in 1998, and then Humira and Remicade and all these came along. And so we figured, well, there's got to be a good one for lupus. I mean, lupus is sort of a cousin to rheumatoid arthritis. Different antibodies. Lupus is more systemic. Different parts of the body. Rheumatoid arthritis is more joints. And so they've done many experimental clinical trials, but only one has been successfully approved by the Food and Drug Administration. That's called Benlysta, Benlysta. And it's a biologic, meaning it was from a living organism originally and then modified, and it's given intravenously for lupus, mostly intravenously.
Yes, and I think they're still researching other.
I'm surprised nothing has gotten approved in the last 4 or 5 years because there's a lot of activity in the pharmaceutical markets in terms of getting something else approved by the FDA for lupus. So there's a lot of it's a very active field.
It's an active period for lupus. Of all the times to have lupus,
the best time for sure is now when they're experimenting with these new treatments. You could get involved in a clinical trial of an unproven therapy, but there will be other things on the horizon, and at least we got Benlysta approved.
Right, and that's huge. So Benlysta, when would you prescribe Benlysta for a patient?
Well, you had mentioned before people don't like steroids. So you could control somebody with a moderately high dose of steroids, and after a while, they get puffy, they gain weight, their face swells, and they say enough of the steroid stuff. Sometimes it affects people emotionally. They get a little, I kind of think if they're sort of the hyper type, they get more hyper, almost a little hypomanic. If they're sort of depressed type, they get sort of depressed.
Okay.
So higher doses are hard to tolerate, so we're always looking for substitutes for it, and Benlysta is one of those, and there are a few others.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the others.
So is lupus an autoimmune disease? Yes, the immune system is a little bit hyperactive, but misdirected.
Right.
So let's calm that immune system down by giving an immune suppressant.
Okay.
So one immune suppressant is called Imuran. It's got a generic name, which is harder to remember, but it's called azathioprine. Another is methotrexate, which is used a lot for lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, especially for joint pain. Then there are a few others. One is called Cellcept. There are a few others, tacrolimus and all that sort of thing for various. So immune suppressant therapy is a little different than biologic therapy, Benlysta, and way different than prednisone.
Okay.
So sometimes it's trying to find the right combination, like a recipe. If you're doing a recipe, and it says in the book, you do this, you got to blend it a little bit until you're satisfied.
Right.
Patient is satisfied.
Right. And if you live in the mountains, sometimes you have to adjust the oven, that kind of thing.
Yes.
You have to, to take your metaphor like another step. I don't know. Sometimes I like to.
I was in the mountains recently in Utah. It was beautiful.
Oh, it is. The mountains of the U.S. are beautiful.
Yes.
So you mentioned several other options that are not Benlysta, and yet those are not approved for lupus.
Well, right. Some of the others are not officially approved for lupus, but they're time-honored ways, and there's no resistance from, from insurance companies or something to using these drugs for lupus, but they're not officially approved for lupus.
Okay, and the reason for that is they just have not cleared the FDA.
Yeah, they're old drugs. They haven't really cleared the FDA for that purpose.
In fact, it's Plaquenil. Plaquenil might not be FDA.
Plaquenil's not FDA approved either.
Right, most of the therapies are off-label, with the exception of Benlysta, and then the steroids, I think, they might be off-label.
Yeah, they're off-label too.
But
everything virtually.
Yeah, and why do you suppose that is?
Well, to do a commercial drug study costs $500 million, or costs at least many, many, many millions of dollars, because you have to take a therapy and compare it to a placebo, and it typically should be blinded. That is, the doctor giving the medicine and the patient receiving the medicine doesn't know if they're getting the real thing. And you have to do this commercial trial. Now, to recruit lupus patients to these trials, some of them are reluctant to do it. It's usually, often has to be national, sometimes international. And you have to do this controlled study. Very expensive to do. You're talking about some of these old drugs that have been around forever. Nobody wants to invest the time and energy to get them officially FDA approved.
Because they're allowed anyway.
They're allowed anyway. There's no
Yeah.
resistance.
Yeah. So more challenging lupus cases, let's say that the prednisone isn't tolerated and Benlysta doesn't work.
Right.
What would you do?
Well, first of all, you have to be certain you're dealing with lupus. We're going to see a patient in a little bit who had TTP. I won't get into what that is, but it was a variation of lupus, and she got very sick from it. So you got to be sure you're dealing with straightforward lupus versus sometimes I see lupus with patients with a lot of aches and pains. They may have lupus and fibromyalgia where they have pain every place. You have to know exactly what you're dealing with. You have to decide which tests as well as symptoms you're going to follow. So as you know, there's so many symptoms of lupus. So if somebody comes in and their principal problem is joint pain and fatigue, or joint pain, fatigue, and rash. Those are the symptoms you're going to be following while you start them on therapy. Did you respond? And as you taper down, are you still responding? And at the same time, you're going to look at the lab tests, and you're going to probably bring this out. But there are specific lupus lab tests, anti-DNA antibodies, anti-nuclear antibodies. But you have to decide which lab tests correlate with their active lupus and follow those. So every person it's like they're like getting 23andMe. It's a specific markers that are both, we call them clinical, based on symptoms, and based on lab tests, and you focus on those clinical findings and lab tests to determine whether to be less aggressive, more aggressive, how to treat the patient. But it's a recipe. It's not the same for everybody.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. We're going to take a brief break, and I'm going to show everyone the disclaimer that we have, and we're going to bring out our second guest, Reverend Dr. Shirley Brummell. So this is the disclaimer. If you want to come on over. So if you could move over. So this event is for educational and informational purposes only and serves to benefit our mission. The Lupus Society of Illinois does not provide medical advice or recommendations. The information should not substitute or replace expert medical care. Before making changes to your medical care, consult your qualified healthcare professional familiar with your medical condition and health status. And now we are back, and welcome Reverend Shirley Brummell, Reverend Dr. Shirley Brummell. Reverend Shirley Brummell devotes her life to assisting others who deal with life's adversities. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, master's degree in pastoral counseling from Loyola in Chicago, PhD in organization development from Benedictine University in Lisle, Illinois. She holds a certificate in addressing spiritual dimension in suffering, healing, and resilience from Chicago Center for Family Health, and ministry to the sick, dying, and grieving from Loyola University. The family journey with cancer, navigating the challenges. Ordained a local elder, Reverend Brummell serves as DuPage AME Church on the pastoral support team and coordinates the DuPage Cares Support Ministry. She's a lupus patient, and she's always been very generous with her time and sharing her story. So welcome, Shirley Brummell.
Thank you.
And I guess I first just wanted to talk with you about getting diagnosed with lupus. It was in 2001, so you've lived with lupus for quite some time.
Yes.
And the first symptoms that you experienced were?
Well, I was extremely fatigued, and my hands and feet were swollen, swelling, and that was it.
So with the fatigue, you had 4 kids, right? And your daughter was just getting ready to go off to college, is that right? And
Well, she was in high school, and but it was just a surprise to me because at that time I thought that I was in the best shape. I was vegan,
Right.
I was jogging, and so I didn't really understand
so
the source of that.
So the fatigue that you experienced wasn't just you were regular tired from 4 kids.
It was really, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Because there's a gap in between my kids, my 11 years, so my sons were grown, and we just had one in the house. She was a teenager, so.
So when you experienced these symptoms, you went to your general practitioner? Mm-hmm. And then your general practitioner...
Well, he took a while, first he's got to see, what's going on in your life, and are you doing too much? Frequently they think, is this something that you're really in your head? But he did a lot of tests, and I just waited. And we were on vacation, and it came back, and it was all of these messages from my doctor, please call, and his diagnosis was, you have lupus. And I was like, what? Nobody in my family has lupus. Nobody has, what is lupus?
So you had to do a lot of research on your own?
Well, yes, because I was, of course, trying to figure it out, where did this come from? What did I do how did I get this? So, and then he said you need to see a rheumatologist, and because it wasn't something that he could treat, he was an internist. So then we started the process of finding a doctor.
Finding a rheumatologist?
Yes.
And eventually you found, how long did it take you to find Dr. Katz?
Well, I was lucky, honestly, because I was living in Naperville at that time, and all of the rheumatologists out there, they're not going to see, you need months to get on their list. And I also was a patient of Dr. Rovner for something else, and Dr. Rovner, when we talked to him, he said, well, if you have lupus, then you need to see Dr. Katz.
Really?
And so that's how we found Dr. Katz.
Yes. And if I remember your story correctly, it wasn't very long before you had a flare, a very serious flare.
Well, the whole lupus thing was crazy. I didn't know how I got it, how I went from being what I told Dr. Rovner. I said I was perfect before this happened, because you think you're living your life to the best of your knowledge, doing all the things you know. And so I got the diagnosis in April, and they kept saying something about a flare, and I didn't know what a flare would be. And at that time I had just enrolled in the graduate program to get my pastoral counseling, and I started, and I just felt more tired. And when I would go, they would say, well, something about your renal is off, and I thought, I know it was another nurse there, wasn't a regular nurse, and I said, she doesn't know what she's talking about. There's nothing wrong with my renal, my kidney, because I had, in the being vegan, I haven't had a soda in ages. And so I just thought, well, how could something be wrong with my kidneys if I'm vegan? I don't drink sodas. I don't, it was like, you're looking for a reason. And I'm towards the end of the first semester at Loyola, working on this counseling program, and I get sick. I mean, I get really, really sick. And it was crazy.
Yeah. And then actually that's a great point. So when you do these tests that you were talking about briefly earlier, when you're trying to come up with a treatment plan, you didn't feel that there was anything going on with your kidneys. You can't feel your kidneys.
No, I
but
didn't.
you need those tests in order to figure out what's actually going on. And that's one of the things about lupus that's really tough. People don't necessarily look sick, and they don't necessarily feel where they're sick. Have you found that to be?
No, I mean, I saw a patient earlier today who is sort of a tough guy, doesn't want to come to the office particularly, but his kidneys are not in good shape. And he understands it because he started to swell up, and you started to swell up.
Yeah.
And they said, well, there's something wrong. What is it? And the kidney's a filter. It's like a coffee filter. And sometimes the coffee grounds can get stuck on the filter, or there can be a hole in the filter, and a lot of protein comes out, and you can get a lot of swelling. But you do have to analyze that. You can't always just talk to somebody and say, oh, it's your kidney, but you do have to look at that. I had a very famous conversation with Shirley. We're not going to get into the details, I don't think, of everything. But I remember once, because she got very sick, and at one point she called me on the phone one day and said, do you think I should have this kidney transplant? And I said, well, I mean, we really have to talk about it and think about it, and was right on the fence.
Yeah.
And Shirley went through with it and decided to do it, and it was the right decision. And ever since then, I think, even before that, but ever since then, you've done great.
Yeah.
Yes. But before that kidney transplant, you were on dialysis for...
we're going back to that first flare. That first flare was a nightmare. I mean,
Total nightmare.
I mean,
Total nightmare.
every organ just about. It hit my lungs. I had pulmonary edema. It hit my kidney, and my heart had congested
What
heart.
was that? You ran into a doctor at Rush the other day who recognized you and said what?
Oh, we were doing a workshop, and he was on the nephrology team, and he said, you almost died. And 4 times, and I said, what? He wasn't supposed to tell me that, because you don't remember some of those. But he was surprised. But it was just crazy, because how could you be so sick that you go in and then you have a clot hit your kidney, and when you come out, you're on dialysis. I mean, dialysis 4 times a week for 3 hours, and you're watching the blood go through your body. You come out, you're exhausted. I mean, you feel tethered to the machine. You can't really go more than 3 days. So whenever we would want to go on vacation, we would have a family vacation in New Jersey, that I'd have to find some place to have dialysis, and one of my kids would say, Dad, I'll take her. They would flip coins. Who's going to take Mom?
And then you had your kidney transplant. How many years ago?
14.
Wow, good.
14.
That's great.
My grandkids are my markers. I was supposed to do something with them, and they were born. So yeah.
Wow.
My kidney is 14 years old.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of amazing that you had this flare that really clearly was life-threatening.
Well, that's the thing about lupus. And look at Reverend Brummell now. She's fine. It can really flare up, mild or severe. But then you can get it under control, and somebody's fine now. I mean, I don't know if you have any symptoms at all now, but you're so much improved, so much better.
Yeah, it was just so crazy, because you just gradually get sicker and sicker, and they were saying, well, you got protein in your blood, or you got this, and I'm not really feeling that.
Right.
And they're saying, well, when a flare happens, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, well, how will I know that I'm getting a flare? And I think one time my husband was going to go golfing, and I was so tired, and I said, "Oh, go have fun." And he leaned over to kiss me goodbye. He was going golfing, and he said, "You are so hot." And he called, and they said, "Get her in."
Yeah.
I had pleurisy, you know.
Wow.
So at that point, I just never knew when the next shoe was going to drop. You know, there was so much. I just thought one of these days.
It's so variable, but pleurisy is a common symptom. Pericarditis, fluid around the heart, or pleurisy, fluid in the lung, and it's worse when you take a deep breath. And the rash over sun-sensitive areas, sun-exposed areas like the facial butterfly rash, and, you know, joint pain, and then hair loss and mouth sores can occur, and a lot of fatigue during flare-ups. And then, you know, sometimes it can bother internal organs, the lungs occasionally, but the kidneys. And so it's variable in terms of intensity, severity, and symptoms, anywhere from it's very quiescent to it's extremely active.
And I'm always struck by the relationship you two have as a patient doctor. It really, can you talk about how that's evolved over the years?
Well, you know, I never want to be a bother, and so I probably keep, you know, I'm not going to call you unless I'm sick. And Dr. Katz knows that. He's sensed that.
I know that.
And so if I call, then he's like, "I got to see you." You know, where we started out with other doctors who are going to say, "Well, you know, did you have a stressful week? Are you sure that's what you feel?" And I'm not a hypochondriac. I have a life to live, but I'm with the lupus. I'm listening. I'm feeling like, what was that? I mean, I think it was the time after I had the transplant, I had just this annoyance in my back and a little pain, and I thought, well, my daughter just went off to college, you know, so it's stress. And it kept bothering me, and I mentioned it to Dr. Katz. Well, I had post-transplant lymphoma in my esophagus from some of the medicines, you know, but he didn't say, "Oh, you're all right, girl, you know, you'll be all right, go."
Right.
And because he discovered it, it was in stage 1. Who finds that in stage 1?
Right.
And so the treatment that I got, you know, it addressed that and cleared it up, but so I just love him because he hears me. If I say something, if I call, I can talk to him, and I research, and he explains. He takes the time to explain it to me. I mean, I have some medical words that, you know, he would say, "Well, you have, you know, this and that, and anti-whatever, and I'm antiphosphorated or whatever." And I thought, who knows that? But he would hear what I researched, and he would either, you know, disclaim it or this is what it is, and I like that in him.
Thank you. Well, Shirley is wonderful to work with. She's a wonderful person and extremely cheery and very nice, and, you know, is sensitive to her body. But, you know, she's also very compliant. She will call, and you're supposed to call when you don't feel well, because I've seen patients who aren't very compliant. They think, "Oh, I'm okay," and then they can get into real trouble.
Right.
So it's important to develop the relationship with your doctor, to alert the doctor or nurse that if you're not really feeling well, and why, and what symptoms you have, and be compliant with treatment if you have lupus.
Right. Well, thank you both so much. We have to wrap up, but again, Reverend Dr. Shirley Brummell, thank you for sharing your story, and Dr. Robert Katz, thank you for sharing your expertise and
Thanks
all
for
of your
inviting us.
information. And this has been the Lupus Society of Illinois, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.